All right, I'm going to attempt to do this way again. I hope I don't have my finger blocking the microphone. And I want to talk a bit more about the laziness by which people talk from distorted memory. Human memory distorts, and that is relevant in several ways. And so when people talk about the Book of Mormon and they talk about population numbers and they talk about archaeology and what kind of things archaeology should find, should have found, should be able to find, people go by their distorted memories and they speak in these generalities from their distorted memories. So I talked about population numbers, and I finished the spreadsheet that I was compiling, and I might go through and do there's some other things that I need to do with it. I might search for some more things, search for terms like all or many or few or this sort of thing, to try to get more passages where there's a sense of the narrator's perception of size or number or amount, even if there isn't anything close to an actual count. But it was a reminder that at the final battle of the Nephites, there were apparently 230,000 or less, all in all, like men, women, children, everybody, the whole nation of those that were still counted as Nephites, whatever that might have meant, was less than 250,000. And they met their end on the slopes of Mount of the hill Cumorah. And Mormon writes about looking out on the slaughter, the sad scene of slaughter, the morning after the battle, and it's this heart-wrenching lament that he writes down. Mormon was distraught and was one man with his perspective seeing this after passing out, after being unconscious, and he mentions seeing all these areas where these 10,000s have fallen. Now, I think we can say that 10,000 was, it's a logical unit of gathering people together. Some people have proposed that it was not a literal number, but a military unit. I'm willing to concede that it was an actual count of 10,000. Must have been so how big of a hill would it need to be to fit that many people? But Mormon mentions that everybody's killed except for some who have escaped southward. A few. Okay. Just because Mormon is a prophet doesn't mean he's infallible or omniscient. Mormon is not able to deploy a drone with a camera. Mormon is not able to access satellite data. Mormon has no modern maps. Mormon has his perspective. And what he might have missed may have been any number of people, especially women and children, who had been among the Nephites, and when the Lamanites came in to do their massacre, figured that they would take captive people, women and children especially, and how many of them would have surrendered? They were already quite demoralized when they saw the Lamanite armies coming in to massacre them. It was a ruthless massacre like the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Even in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, the Utah settlers took captives. They took children captives to raise in their own families, and that was a big stink that happened because people said, "You horrible Mormons." They went to the site, I think a year later, and saw bones strewn all over the place. If they'd left the site undisturbed, how much would be left now? Are you going to find remains there now that people have paid attention to the site and gone through and gathered up bones and stuff? Anyway, so I think it quite likely that the Lamanites would have taken many captive. So already you've got less than 250,000 gathered, less than that killed, and it's anybody's guess, and I think it's open to a lot of proposals as to how many really would have been killed that Mormon would have seen from his perch, and what he would have been able to accurately count, and how many people would have escaped, how many people would have surrendered, been captured. All right, so that's Cumorah. That's the final resting place of not millions of people. Nowhere in the Book of Mormon is there ever a mention of a single battle where millions of people are killed. And this is part of the distortion of memory that people fall prey to sometimes. Well, in the Book of Mormon it talks about the battles where millions of people were killed. Where's all the skeletons? Where are all the remains? Should be so easy to find. I just recently reread excellent book by Charles Mann, 1491. And it's about 20 years old now. I really would love to see a new edition or somebody building on this with what has been found since. Essentially laying out and synthesizing all the data that shows how populous the Americas were before European settlement, how large and complex the societies and civilizations were all over the place, and maybe as many as 90% of all these people got wiped out by the diseases that the Europeans unwittingly brought. Nobody had any idea. I mean, people knew about infection. People didn't understand viruses or germs or any of that stuff. And so it was this horrible tragedy that there's the story of like sending smallpox laden blankets, but that was after the cat was well out of the bag. The first and worst shock came like from some Europeans setting foot somewhere, and then the disease swept through the land and went, there was people who had never even seen Europeans yet, and the disease came through, and whole villages, whole areas would have been just gone. I believe he mentions the Massachusetts settlers coming in and finding bones strewn around. All right, well, where are all those bones now, huh? All those people met their ends, all those people died. Where are those bones now, huh? Well, yeah, of course. They wouldn't just sit there. I mean, when you get a bunch of people dying, there's Limhi scouts, they go and find all the bones strewn all over the ground. And that would have been probably less than 100 years after they were killed. And now, depending on where you think this happened, the environment where they were sitting untended would have decomposed them after a while. So again, something I read in 1491 is they found these remnants of the Olmec civilization, but they haven't found any skeletons, because there aren't going to be any skeletons still around after all that time. There's places where there simply is not the permanence. Any organic matter, including bone, will not survive the environment, and that's decomposition. And in other places you have things to worry about, like scavengers and weather and whatever else. I mean, how many, any environment that has animals, wild animals of any size. I know that they're not as densely populated as humans, but you can reflect on how wild animals, they die, their flesh gets eaten by predators and scavengers, the bones just get scattered all over the place, and then the bones might wear away through wind erosion or whatever. But skeletons don't just they don't just neatly lie down, get all cuddled up in a heap, and then just wait for Indiana Jones to come along so they can say blah and have snakes crawling out of their eyes and whatever, or something like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies, where there's skulls on the ground that you're walking on. They've been there for however many years, thousands of years, right? I mean, this is anyway, I think thousands of years. I mean, it was the same, it was contemporary with the battle at Mount Doom, right? And then there's the Dead Marshes. And in the book, they actually address this. Frodo says there's no way that corpses could still be intact after so long. There must be some illusion. But Jackson in the movie isn't going to get that cerebral about anything. He's just going to razzle-dazzle us with the spectacle of these ghostly, these fresh-looking corpses lying in the water and opening their eyes, and then these ghosts and all this kind of stuff. And so, of course, anybody who's seen these movies knows that if there's ever a big battle, that, what the skeletons, what the dead are supposed to do, or they're supposed to lie there in a heap, just stay there for hundreds of years, so that anytime anybody is walking by, the skeletons are there waving their arms, and somebody says, "Hey, look, skeletons! Let's go investigate." Oh, wow, there's obviously a big battle there, speaking for the camera, because every life is a movie, because we learn about how things go by watching movies. Oh, there was a big battle here, obviously. Yes, well, and on the news, well, it looks like they found the site of the Battle of Cumorah because the skeletons were all just sitting there, waiting for somebody to come along. Okay, so Mormon almost certainly got the idea of taking 4 years to gather his people to make the last stand at Cumorah, because that's what the Jaredites had done. And the story of the Jaredites probably would have been in the collective conscious of the final division of Nephites and Lamanites was from a previous unity that had lasted about 200 years, right? So it was probably in the consciousness of these people, kind of like the stories of King Arthur or whatever. And Moroni filtering the Book of Ether. And the Book of Ether is not to be taken literally in every respect. The Book of Ether, consider the sources, and I could get into this a lot. For one thing, Ether is writing what he's writing, which gets translated by Mosiah and filtered through Moroni's purpose in narrating and showing these parallels, right? But the final battle of the Jaredites, first off, the only mention of millions is when they're camped by this other, they're not even apparently anywhere close to Cumorah when there's the mention of millions. And who knows how long all this fighting has been going on. Maybe this is some of the dead who have just been left to lie in places further south or wherever that the Limhi scouts will find, which also suggests kind of a small scale. But eventually, after all this fighting, Coriantumr and Shiz set up their rival camps, and everybody's gathering. They're both gathering people for 4 years, and then they start to fight. Now, Coriantumr is camped near the hill Ramah, which is Cumorah. It never says they're on it. Anyway, they have this final battle that lasts 7 days. Now, I will reserve the right to look at this and think, if there's this final battle that lasts 7 days, then there's something awfully mythical and legendary about this. This seems like some kind of symbolic, meaningful, legendary thing to me. All right. So 7 days of a battle, and we only get counts of people on the 5th and 6th days. And they're in the double digits. We have no way of knowing. Maybe that's an accurate count. Who took the accurate count? Did Ether interview Coriantumr? Did Ether go, was Ether watching? Ether couldn't deploy a drone with cameras or call in satellite data any more than Mormon could. Ether was apparently hiding while this happened, maybe. We're not sure. The Book of Ether is not something to be read as fact. Not to say that it's completely unreliable. Away with that all or nothing, infantile stuff. This is what happens when people wrote down stories long ago, is you'd have these mixtures of maybe precise figures, Maybe they were meant to prove a certain point. In any case, that's the way it goes down. We get final counts the 5th and 6th days of this battle. We have no way of knowing how many there were before then. And then, of course, once that's all done, eventually the Nephites move into this area. You think they're just going to let whatever remains might have stayed there for the past 400 or 500 years? Who knows how many remains were left there by that time? Depends on the kind of environment we're talking about, which has bearing on where you think it happened. And so that has a lot of bearing on what you would expect to find and where you think you should look. And have we looked where it makes the most sense to look? And what should we expect to find if we look there? Certainly, we're not going to find a bunch of, skeletons all cuddled in a heap saying, "Bah!" with snakes coming out of their eyes, so to thrill us like we're watching an Indiana Jones movie. Right. So, again, human memory distorts. And when we're talking about the Book of Mormon, if we want to be serious, we don't go by our memory. We don't grandstand and start to spin our ideas based on our distorted memories. We have to pay close attention to what's actually there, and we have to think about how it got there, how it got written down, who was writing, what his perspective was, and so many things. And when we look at that closely, we are freed from unrealistic expectations. And we don't have to call the manager because we came expecting to watch an Indiana Jones movie and we didn't get it and we want our money back. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you later.